Well, I'm Elizabeth Bauer, and I live out in Middletown. When COVID first became part of the news, I was extremely concerned about it because I have asthma and I have an autoimmune disease. So I started taking precautions, wearing a mask and gloves prior to the government and the scientists telling us to do so. Around March 21st, I started having some gastrointestinal problems, which cleared up rather quickly, but then within a couple of days, I started having breathing problems and coughing. I ignored it for a couple of days. Then by March 26th, I started with a horrible, horrible pain in my chest, feeling like I'd been hit with a brick. And the coughing began again. Now, this was a really, really deep bronchial cough, and I was exhausted. I had no energy to do anything. So I called my doctor, and they made a telehealth appointment for me. However, the doctor's office called me back and said, you know, you had bronchitis in January. We want you to come in. I want to listen to your lungs. So I went in, and long story short, they did do a flu test first, which came back negative. Then they did the nasal swab, or what we call the brain swab. And I was told to go home and isolate. So I completely locked myself up with my dogs in the master bedroom, told my husband, stay away, and stayed in there. On April 1st, I got the phone call that, guess what, you're positive. So being one of the very first cases in the area, I met the criteria, which is why I was fortunate to get the test. And I say fortunate because I'm part of the long-haul COVID survivor group, and there are an awful lot of COVID patients from early on that never were tested. And so they go under the assumption, or they go under what their doctors have told them, as assuming they've had COVID. But I was fortunate to know for a fact that that's what it was. But most of my trouble has been the lungs, the breathing problems. I had to become my own doctor, which is what a lot of us have to do. Early on, you were told, don't go to the hospital, because they were afraid of overwhelming the hospital system. So don't go to the hospital unless you absolutely cannot breathe and unless your O2 drops below 90. Well, how many of us have pulse oximeters at home? How many of us have the ability to monitor our blood pressure? All of these things that we had to do. So I scrambled. I was able to get the pulse oximeter. I did have the ability to take my blood pressure, my temperature, and so on. So I was monitoring that on a regular basis. My O2 sats stayed low, around 92, 93 for the most part. So the first week or so, I was very, very tired. I slept most of the time, coughed like crazy. They put me on doxycycline and the albuterol inhalers to start with. And then I started to feel a little bit better, and I thought, okay, this isn't so bad. I can handle a week or so of this. And I knew I was still, sort of in that danger zone of being contagious, so I didn't go anyplace. But around April 15th, I took a nosedive. So I had been feeling better, thinking optimistically, and then all of a sudden just crashed. And when I say crashed, complete exhaustion. I lay in bed and I would sleep and sleep and sleep and think to myself when I would get some consciousness back and think, wonder if I go back to sleep if I'll ever wake up again. And, the thought of death was there, thinking, okay, well, everybody's dying from this, so maybe I should get all my affairs in order. It wasn't fearful, it was just sort of a matter-of-fact feeling. But after I took that nosedive, I called my doctor's office and I said, I give up. What the heck are we doing now? So they put me on hydroxychloroquine and the zithromycin. A little bit apprehensive about doing it. Don't know that it did anything one way or the other, but I took it. And so probably I did the up and down until about the beginning of May. And then, with headaches that were horrible in the back of my head and in my eye sockets. I had blurry eyes, painful eyes, my chest hurting like crazy, the coughing. Sometimes it was a dry cough, sometimes it was a deep bronchial cough. But then early one morning in May, I got up and I said, I can't take this anymore. I've got to go to the hospital. So I did go. It was on about day, I don't know, it was May 5th, I think, that I finally went over to the hospital. They did lots of tests on me. They did admit me. They kept me mostly for observation because by then I was so far out. So I only stayed for maybe 36 hours and was discharged back home. By June, I was actually doing better, and I thought, okay, I'm on the road to recovery. So June, July were fairly decent. August, all hell broke loose again, and I was sick as a dog. By the middle of August, I remember sort of feeling like I was standing at the top of a rabbit hole. And I thought, if I fall in there, I'm never coming back out. And I was ready to give up. I was feeling so sick. And again, it's the breathing problems for me that were causing me so much concern. The fact that I had to struggle so much. The heat and the humidity made me feel like I was suffocating when I would breathe. So I was really getting kind of overwhelmed with this, thinking I've had enough. And both of my kids were very concerned that I was going to go down that hole and not come back. In fact, my oldest son, who lives in Scotland, said to me, I think we need to have a conversation about what your plans are for when you die. So at that point, I sort of pulled myself up by my bootstraps and thought, I've got to fight this. One of the biggest battles, I think, is that you've got so many doctors that are trying to treat you. And I come from a medical family, so I have a lot of respect for the medical community and what they're dealing with. But it's so difficult as a patient to hear a doctor say to you, I don't know what to do. You have to respect it, but how do you deal with it when you're so sick and you're so desperate? So part of my concern was they were throwing medicines at me right and left, not knowing what to do. In August, in fact, I was on 8 medications for my breathing, just for my breathing. So at one point I just said to heck with it. One of them was prednisone. I knew I had to titrate that, but I stopped taking all of it, thinking I've just got to clear my body out. So I turned the corner. I got better. Not perfect, but I got better. Then in early October, same thing. Not as bad as the relapse in August, but I relapsed again. And it just comes and it goes. It does what it wants to do. There's no, as a long hauler, which is what I am now, I'm at 8.5 months since I got sick. I'm not COVID positive. I don't have the antibodies. I did do the antibody testing hoping to do plasma donation, but they aren't present. I'm anxious to know whether or not they have a T-cell blood test that they can do, since there's discussion about T-cell immunity possibly. But for now, what I try to do, the thing that's most important for me, is sharing my story and educating people about how serious this is. And even in my closest group of friends, until I find that they have experienced a scare with it or have actually had it, which very few have, they don't really pay attention. They marginalize it and think, oh, you can't be that sick. You cannot continue to be sick at this point. They don't pay attention to the long haul stories and the fact that people have got side effects and possible permanent damage. I've got brain fog. I was just talking to my neurologist yesterday about this, that I could be sitting here telling you a story about something and I'll completely blank on a word that I'm trying to say. I can't remember things. I misplace things all the time, but we don't have answers, so we just have to do the best that we can do. when I got the diagnosis, one of the things that I did was on my Facebook page, every single day for 60 days, I posted what was going on with me, what I'd learned that day in the news, what I would share articles. I would tell people how I was feeling. And I was very public about it. I know there are people that are feeling very stigmatized. They feel like they're lepers, and are very afraid to share their story. There are people who are afraid to tell their employer. And there's going to be a huge problem with employment coming down the pike, because a lot of people, especially long haulers that are having difficulty working, are starting to apply for disability. And I was in human resources for over 30 years, and I know the pitfalls of disability, so I'm very concerned about the long haul folks and what's going to happen with their employment, whether or not they're going to be able to sustain themselves. So it's real. This isn't a joke. This is not something you want to catch. You may be lucky, you may be asymptomatic, you may get it, get over it quickly, and I hope that happens if that's going to happen to you. But the reality is, you could end up in the hospital on a ventilator. You could lose your life. You could have long-haul symptoms that are going to affect other parts of your body, and you don't know whether or not those will ever get better. I've got high blood pressure now. I never had that before, but I've had, cardiac workup. I've got pulmonologists working with me. I had an infectious disease doctor. I have a neurologist, my GP. I have a rheumatologist. And all of these doctors trying to keep all of this information together and trying to coordinate your care, that's another issue. So that's where I am. It's been a long road, but I keep a good attitude about it. I can't feel sorry for myself. I cannot go down that path. I just have to remain hopeful that they're going to figure something out and they're going to be able to help us. I just hope there isn't anything permanent.